I was headed home from a 3-day leadership seminar in plain clothes, jeans, a windbreaker, and my badge zipped inside my inner pocket. My department knew I preferred not to flash my rank unless necessary. Tonight, it definitely wasn't supposed to be. The traffic was light as I drove through the quieter side of the city, my unmarked black Tahoe blending in with the night. That's when I noticed flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled over calmly. No big deal. A young officer stormed out of the patrol car like he was in a hostage standoff. He approached my window with one hand on his holster. I cracked it open. License and registration. Now, he barked. I kept my voice even. Sure, officer. Mind telling me why I'm being stopped? No questions. Step out of the vehicle. I hesitated, not out of defiance, but confusion. I hadn't been speeding. No broken lights. Nothing. Still, I followed his order. As I opened the door, he grabbed my arm roughly and shoved me against the SUV. Hands where I can see them. I tried to speak. That's when he struck me. Open palm. Right across the face. The world spun for a second, not from the hit, but the shock. Do you realize what you've just done? I asked, eyes narrowing. He scoffed. You people always play the victim. I slowly reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge. His eyes scanned it, and froze. Lieutenant Commander Angela Parks. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Now, I said, voice calm but ice cold, wanna try this again? The silence stretched for what felt like a full minute. His face drained of color as he stared at the badge in my hand, the engraved gold glinting under the cruiser's headlights. I didn't know, he stammered. I didn't move. That's clear. He stepped back awkwardly, his hand no longer near his holster. Ma'am, I didn't recognize you. That's the problem, I replied. You shouldn't need to. I could see the sweat forming at his temples. He was young, mid-20s at most, and clearly rattled now that the situation wasn't what he thought it was. His eyes flicked between my face and the badge like he was trying to wake himself from a bad dream. You assaulted a senior officer during an unlawful stop, failed to provide cause, and made physical contact without warning or justification. I thought you were reaching for something, he mumbled. In my coat. After I already cooperated. I shook my head, fighting the sting in my cheek. What exactly made you escalate this quickly? He didn't answer. I stepped forward, slow and controlled. Do you treat every woman like this? Or just the ones you assume won't fight back? He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand, not to strike, but to silence him. You'll speak to Internal Affairs first thing tomorrow. I'll be there too. He blinked rapidly. Please, ma'am. I messed up. I get it. But don't let this ruin me. I studied him. You made a choice. And tonight, so will I. His breath caught. I walked back to my vehicle, opened the door, and paused. Follow me to the precinct. We're settling this officially. He didn't argue. As I drove off with him trailing behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The station was quiet when we arrived, night shift just settling in. I parked in my reserved spot. He pulled up behind me, headlights still on, engine running like he didn't know whether to stay or flee. I got out and waited. Eventually, he stepped out of his cruiser, his posture tense. Gone was the puffed-up swagger he'd had during the stop. Now, he looked like a cadet awaiting expulsion. We entered through the side entrance, reserved for command staff. A few officers glanced up from their desks as we passed. One of the sergeants started to stand when he saw me, then noticed the rookie trailing behind and froze. In my office, I said flatly. The young officer, nameplate read D. Monroe, followed like a shadow. Once inside, I closed the door, sat down, and gestured for him to do the same. He didn't. He just stood there, shoulders hunched. I placed my badge on the desk between us. "Officer Monroe, how long have you been on patrol?" "6 months, ma'am." "And in those 6 months, how many stops have you conducted alone?" "A couple dozen, maybe." I nodded slowly. "Do you realize what could have happened tonight?" "Yes, ma'am." "I do now." "No. You don't. If I had reacted differently, if I had defended myself, or you'd panicked harder, we could both be in the morgue. Over nothing." He swallowed hard. I opened a drawer and took out a form. "You'll write a full statement. You'll explain every step you took tonight, and why. Then we're forwarding this to Internal Affairs." He flinched. "Will I be fired?" "That's not up to me," I said. "But I'll tell you this, tonight wasn't about fear. It was about assumption. And that's what will haunt you most." He finally sat, eyes down. I handed him a pen. The pen trembled slightly in his hand as he began to write. I sat across from him in silence, watching the words form. Every so often he paused, his eyes clouded with something heavier than panic, guilt, maybe. Or shame. When he finished, he pushed the form toward me like it burned his fingers. I read it thoroughly. No exaggerations. No deflection. Just a straightforward admission of what happened, step by step. At least he didn't lie. "You've got a lot to learn, Monroe," I said. "And I don't mean just policy." He nodded faintly. I leaned forward. "Let me tell you something. I started out in this department over 15 years ago. I've worn every uniform, worked every beat. I've dealt with threats you've only read about. And not once, have I laid hands on someone during a routine stop unless it was absolutely necessary." He looked up. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You didn't think," I said bluntly. "You reacted. You saw someone you thought you could control. That's not policing. That's power without discipline." His eyes dropped again. "I'm not here to destroy your career, Monroe," I said, my tone softening just enough. "But I am here to make sure you understand that you don't get to carry a badge if you don't respect what it stands for." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." I stood. "Report to Internal Affairs at 9 a.m. sharp. I'll be there. You'll face this. And whatever happens, happens." As I reached for the door, he asked quietly, "Would it have been different, if you weren't who you are?" I turned back to him. "That's a question you'll have to live with." Then I walked out, leaving the weight of that answer behind. The next morning, I was in the Internal Affairs conference room early, coffee untouched, watching the door. When Officer Monroe stepped in, he looked like he hadn't slept. His uniform was sharp, but his face told another story, drawn, pale, humbled. The IA investigator, Captain Reeves, entered a moment later. She glanced at Monroe, then at me. "You sure you want to be present for this, Lieutenant Commander?" I requested it. Reeves gave a brief nod and began the session. "This is a formal internal review regarding use of force during a non-criminal traffic stop. Officer Monroe, you are required to answer truthfully." He did. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He admitted to escalating without cause. Admitted that he hadn't followed protocol. Admitted that he let assumptions steer his actions. And when Reeves asked if he'd do anything differently, he paused. Then he said, "I wouldn't just change my behavior. I'd change how I see people. Because that's what led to all of it." That landed. Reeves took notes in silence for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Do you wish to file a separate complaint?" I met Monroe's eyes. "No. The report stands. The consequence will speak for itself. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for accountability. Reeves nodded once more. We'll complete our internal findings within a week. You'll both be informed. As we stepped into the hallway afterward, Monroe hesitated. I don't expect forgiveness, ma'am. Good, I said. You're not owed it. But maybe, if you stay on this job, you'll earn something more useful, respect. From the right people this time. He nodded silently, then turned and walked away. And for the first time since last night, I let myself exhale. A week passed. The department kept it quiet, no leaks, no headlines. The internal review concluded that Officer Monroe would receive a formal reprimand, mandatory retraining, and be placed on probation for 90 days. He wasn't fired. But he wasn't let off the hook either. Some officers whispered about it. Some didn't know the full story. That was fine with me. This wasn't about public spectacle. A few nights later, I stayed late at the precinct, reviewing case files. Just as I was about to shut down, a soft knock tapped on my office door. It was Monroe. He looked more centered now. Tired, but focused. Ma'am, I just wanted to thank you, he said quietly. For what? I asked. For not ending my career. For holding me accountable instead of burying me. I get now that if I'm going to wear this badge, I have to earn it, every day. I nodded. That's the only way it counts. He lingered for a second. If there's ever anything I can do, there is, I cut in. Do better. Every shift. Every call. Treat every person like they could be sitting where I am. He nodded once, firmly, and left. As I sat back in my chair, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, what happened that night wouldn't just be a lesson for one officer. Maybe it would be the ripple that started change. Weeks later, I was leading a departmental training workshop titled Judgment Under Pressure. It was mandatory for all patrol officers, and I could feel the resistance in the room when I first walked in, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. But as I walked them through the footage from similar incidents, broke down protocol, and then told my own story, without naming names, the room changed. They listened. Some shifted in their seats. Others lowered their eyes. One officer even raised his hand and asked, "What made you keep your cool when it would have been easier to snap back?" I answered honestly. Because the moment you lose control, you lose the truth. And I needed him to see the truth. Not my anger. Later that day, Monroe approached me quietly after class. He'd volunteered to help lead the next session. He didn't say anything grand. Just a quiet, "I'm trying." That was enough. In this line of work, change doesn't come from policy memos or press conferences. It comes from one officer at a time choosing the harder, better path. And on that front, I'd already won. 2 days after the workshop, I got a call from the Deputy Commissioner's office. "Lieutenant Commander Parks," the voice said over the line. "We've reviewed your conduct over the last month, particularly regarding the Monroe incident and your subsequent training sessions. There's been interest from higher up." I leaned back in my chair. Interest? Yes. They want you to oversee a new task force. Focused on officer discretion, accountability, and community leadership. You'll be reporting directly to the chief's office. It's yours, if you want it. I didn't answer right away. Because all I could think about was that traffic stop. A hit that never should have happened. A badge revealed too late. A moment that could have broken someone, or changed them. Finally, I said, "I'll take it." That evening, I left the precinct and walked to my SUV. No cruiser followed. No confrontation. Just peace. Quiet. Respect. And as I sat behind the wheel, I didn't feel like someone who'd won a battle. I felt like someone who'd turned one moment into a mission. A month into the new role, I found myself standing before a group of cadets, fresh out of the academy, eager and untested. I told them the story. Not to humiliate the officer involved. Not to preach. But to make it real. How many of you, I asked, think authority means you're always in control? A few hands went up, hesitant, unsure. I nodded. That's natural. But it's wrong. Authority means you're responsible, especially when things feel out of control. They listened closely. Every one of them. After the session, a young woman approached me, nervous, sharp-eyed. "Ma'am," she said, "was the officer in the story ever the same afterward?" I thought about it. "Not the same," I said. "Better. But only because someone gave him the chance to face what he did, and choose differently." She nodded slowly, taking that in. Before she walked off, I added, "And don't forget, the person you underestimate today might be the one writing your evaluation tomorrow." She smiled. That night, I left the training center with a quiet thought: maybe real change doesn't come from a single explosion. Maybe it comes from 1,000 quiet detonations, in the minds of those just beginning. A few weeks later, I was heading to a regional leadership summit, this time as the keynote speaker. The same highway. The same black Tahoe. But everything felt different. As I approached the exit ramp to the convention center, a patrol car pulled up beside me in traffic. Familiar unit number. Familiar posture behind the wheel. It was Monroe. He looked over and saw me. Our eyes met for a second. He didn't look away. Instead, he gave a small, respectful nod. Not fear. Not guilt. Just acknowledgement. And I nodded back. He merged behind me, letting me take the lead. When I parked, I sat for a moment with the engine off, looking out across the city skyline. My badge rested on the seat beside me, not hidden, not flaunted. Just there. Where it belonged. Not every officer would change. But one had. And sometimes, that's enough to start a revolution. It was a rainy Friday evening when I heard the knock at my office door. I looked up, expecting paperwork, maybe a message from dispatch. Instead, standing there, soaked and hesitant, was Officer Monroe. Again. "Got a minute?" he asked. I gestured for him to come in. He didn't sit this time. He stood tall. Different posture than before, more sure of himself, but without arrogance. "I wanted to tell you something," he began. I put in a request to transfer. My eyebrows lifted slightly. "Where to?" "The Community Engagement Division," he said. "I want to work closer with the neighborhoods we patrol. Build trust instead of tension." That caught me off guard. "I know it won't erase what happened," he added quickly. "But maybe if I can be part of the solution, it means something." I stood and walked around the desk. Looked him in the eye. No rank. No shields. Just two officers, standing in the same storm, one further down the road. "It means more than you think," I said. He nodded once. Then offered his hand. I took it. And in that moment, not as a superior, but as a witness to growth, I knew something real had changed. Not just in him. In me too. Months passed. Officer Monroe's transfer was approved. I kept tabs from a distance, quietly observing how he carried himself in the new role. He attended neighborhood meetings, helped de-escalate volatile situations, and even organized a weekend mentorship program for at-risk youth. But one day, I received an email from a resident in a neighborhood where tensions with the department had run high for years. It was short. Plain. No punctuation. "I don't know what changed in your department, but this new Officer Monroe," he listened, and it made a difference. I stared at the message for a long time. That night, I updated a single line in our department's internal policy guide, something every officer reads when they're sworn in. Respect isn't based on what you see. It's how you choose to see. It was a quiet change. No ceremony. No press release. But I knew one thing for sure, the old ways were fading. And from a single mistake that could have ended everything, we built something stronger than punishment ever could. A new standard. One officer at a time. Years later, I stood at the podium inside the Academy's Grand Hall. Rows of fresh recruits sat in crisp uniforms, eyes full of questions, ambition, and uncertainty. Behind me on the stage were officers, captains, even members of city council. But one seat remained empty, until, moments before I spoke, a familiar figure entered quietly and took his place. Officer Monroe, now Sergeant Monroe. He didn't wave. Didn't nod. Just sat with calm presence, the kind you only earn through fire and reflection. I stepped up to the mic. "I've spent my career trying to build something more than policy," I began. "Because policy tells you what you can do. But character? That tells you what you should do." I scanned the faces in the crowd. Years ago, a single mistake almost shattered 2 lives. But accountability, humility, and second chances turned that moment into a foundation. A few rows in, a recruit raised her hand. "Lieutenant Commander," she asked, "was it you who changed him, or did he change himself?" I smiled. "Both," I said. "But I gave him a door. He chose to walk through it." And as I looked out over the next generation of officers, I realized something. That moment on the side of the road wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy.